On the Keeping of a Book of Shadow, or Personal Spellbook, a transmission of Alex Serenilan in conjunction with the Athenaeum Ministry of Magical Toolkeeping. Introductory Notes, 216, Flame Eternal. In the name of the Horned God, I offer to you my entire heart. I am called Alex Serenilan. I am a primary steward of the Athenaeum and a representative of the Luminous Order, Loop 3. I have produced this tract after observing the apparent necessity of the message. For this reason, of course, I have promptly committed this message to audiovisual presentation. I am not thrilled that the younger population cannot read, and I believe it is in fact their fault, but this does not mean that the progress of civilization may simply stop. As always, I recommend reading my words in their entirety twice before referencing the audiovisual presentation. On the Keeping of a Personal Grimoire. Recently, I found myself in a situation where a fellow craft inquired about a question so bafflingly simple I would never have thought to commit its answer to the form of an essay. They had purchased an oversized bound book emblazoned with a large pentacle, but were surprised to discover it was in fact a journal, with blank pages, and no contents. The aspirant had no idea what the purpose of such a book might be, and asked its use plainly and in apparent earnest. I do not find it productive, as the other participants in this scenario did, to continue berating the child and never answering them. I am self-taught, and I cannot imagine a time I would ever purchase a journal and not know what to do with it, but the medium of communication has changed in as short a time as the last 20 years. Those born prior to the year 34 remember a world where the digital plane did not exist as a practical medium, or where this plane only scantily existed to host a finite scope of information. As jarring as it seems, even a mundane diary may well have been obsolete by the dominance of the digital plane in daily activity, and we are just now seeing this made evident. I am accustomed to calling a journal expressly dedicated to notes on magical theory and practice, as well as homespun spellwork a book of shadow. A book of shadow is always an item possessed. There is rarely a book of shadow, it is always their book of shadow or my book of shadow. It is a personal grimoire, and it should be blank when it is commissioned. The aspirant, as they progress to fellow craft, will fill the pages with content as they see fit. Selecting the Book of Shadow. There is no definitive standard for the Book of Shadow, should the magician choose to keep one. Recall that many magical traditions actually forbid the committing of notes to paper. Having been trained partially by a druid, I have seen directly the positive impact this approach has, and to a certain extent these principles have influenced my own craft, though I did choose to keep personal grimoires at a few points of my magical career. In the same way, many who do keep a personal spellbook choose one or more inconspicuous journals. In the situation of our querent, their book is flamboyant and clear in its purpose. No one would confuse this book for any other type of notebook, and if the contents of this notebook were mundane, this would not be expected. I do know someone who keeps their cookbook in such a journal, but this is done as an eccentricity, and this is not really a spellbook. The loud, flamboyant book has a certain charm, and by this charm may be afforded a degree of power as a personal totem. My own Book of Shadow was plain black, bound in imitation leather and very simply decorated, but the decor was obvious to the extent that even my fellow craft did not like to handle the book. It was clearly an artifact of my personal power. Contrast this to a more obvious book I kept at another time, which was routinely handled and reviewed by enemies who had access to my space. These same people stole my clothes and personal effects, eating scraps of my power like vultures. With the wisdom I have now, I'd never have allowed these people in my home, but this was not fully in my control at that time. If you do not have full control of your domicile and those who pass through it, it is best to keep an understated book of shadow. In the same way, you may consider a need to cipher your notes. This is not likely to fool religious parents, however. So then, the decision to keep a loud and obvious book or a subtle journal is up to the magician. Be prepared for the reasonable outcome for your choice. People are going to peek at the book that draws their attention, and the book will likely frighten the superstitious, but they will still feel compelled to look at it. If you are concerned for your privacy, there may be a virtue in this idea of committing everything to memory and never writing anything down. Imagine being able to recall the exact dimensions of, say, a piece of pipe that you needed for new plumbing that you were installing in your own home. Without the enjoyment of a post-it note, you somehow managed to go to the hardware store knowing exactly what you needed, describing it perfectly without knowing any specialized language, and the clerk retrieving exactly what you needed. This same virtue may be attained by learning how to incant the achievement of a coat of arms, to describe perfectly something that is seen, or envisioned in the mind's eye, without needing to visually reference it. This is a profound power that exceeds the bounds of normal imagination, even in those who allege to have opened their third eye. On the contents of the Book of Shadow. Let us suppose you eschew the Druid method and decide to write things down. Our querent still did not know what they would, should or even might commit to the Book of Shadow. The book is sometimes consecrated with the magician's magical motto, if they have selected one. The magician should not write down their magical name, if you know why you have a magical name to begin with, especially in situations where you were given a magical name by another person. I will not have to explain why it is not written down. This is one of the only points in the keeping of such a book that is not up for personal interpretation. You may write your magical motto, but not your magical name. You may also commit a polygon of your choosing, a personal glyph, or similar, to the interior front cover or the first page of the book. This page is used for the consecration of the Book of Shadow as a personal magical tool. Following the consecration, the Book of Shadow is used for taking important notes on magical practice, practicing copy of things such as sigils and foreign character sets, such as Hebrew, Arabic, the character sets of the Eastern languages etc., and writing down your own personal spells as you devise them. For magical notes, one may consider drafting or practicing complex charts in a plain notebook and committing only the master chart to the Book of Shadow. If you are in a situation where paper is scarce and you can only maintain a single notebook, again you may need to consider the Druid method. It is effective both for those who face opposition just as well as those who have an unsympathetic landlord, such as a parent. You would be surprised how much you can keep in your short-term memory if your mind is not filled with idle fluff. I personally kept my early drafts of the Zodiac Wheel, the celestial and infernal trees of the Kabbalah and personal sigils in my Book of Shadow. I also committed inspired poems to the book, or one of my various books. I personally kept one Book of Shadow, which acted as my master book, and 3 or 4 separate miniature diaries. Each diary acted as a spellbook for operative use, its color and the sigil with which I consecrated the cover directing the current of my magical endeavors. Each poem committed to the book charged the power of my spell until the book was complete. In almost every situation, the spellbook itself decided when it was done. I had virtually nothing to do with the decision. You should be aware that spellbooks like this are liable to disappear or burn up after their current is expended. Whether they are stolen or collected by forces unseen is unclear, but they do disappear. So the Book of Shadow is a personal grimoire, which begins as a journal. It may be as plain as a notebook one uses for mundane academia, or as cinematic as one desires. The book must be kept in a manner distinct from the keeping of an ordinary notebook, and it is best to keep loose notes and drafting of sigils on plain paper, committing to the Book of Shadow only finished work. If desired, the book can become a totem of personal power, and its magnetic energy will be evident to those who feel its power. However, because of the obvious power that begins to fill a journal as it becomes a tome or grimoire, containing the master charts of your occult study, the master copy of your sigils and the master incantations for your personal spells, an imperative to guard the book from the eyes of others will eventually become clear to the competent magician. So while the flamboyant book may be exceptional for short-term gains of personal glamour, plainly, you want to look like a witch, so you buy a book you feel conveys this and you take pictures of yourself holding the book or staging the book near other magical tools you likely understand no better. You may wish to consider the virtue of committing your scribblings to memory, and keeping a lower profile for your magical tools. As you rise to power within your magical path, you can expect to make enemies that you did not have and would not have had before. There are several reasons for this. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the lore. Love is the lore. This material was compounded and distributed in conjunction with the Athenaeum, an institution working in conjunction with the Luminous Order, Loot 3. It may be freely distributed provided its contents are not augmented or truncated, especially in such situations where either this message or the star of the Athenaeum would be disturbed. Contact may be made at luminousorder3@gmail.com. luminousorder3@gmail.com. We continuously strive for academic rigor in discussing the nature of the subtle forces, and what they may do.